Hello, rant time. Now, I just had this like really recent realization that, okay, sometimes I rant, but then I think that I always fail to sound really salty in my rant videos, and I'm sure many of you guys out there really love watching rant videos. I love rant videos by booktubers, especially when they rant about any particular book or any particular subjects, topics. I love that. I love seeing people ranting, and it's so cathartic to see people being so salty about something. But then I sort of realized that in my own ranty videos, I always sounded not as salty as I wanted to be, because occasionally I would probably end up sounding a little bit nice about the things I'm ranting about. So, I don't know. So, my goal in this video is I'm going to try to be as salty as possible. And I am going to be salty towards this book. And this is the Nakano Thrift Shop, written by Hiromi Kawakami, and it was translated into English by Allison, Markin, Powell. Already I am sensing that I might not be as salty as I want to be in this video, because to be honest, I do have some nice things to say about this book. But for the most part, I actually did not enjoy reading it. And I would say that it sort of had something to do with my own personal habit in viewing the things that I read, or rather the things that I have not read and I'm going to read. Now, I'm going to explain more about that. But before I talk about that, let me talk about what this novel is about. So, the Nakano Thrift Shop involves this main character. Her name is Hitomi, and she lives in Tokyo, and she's a worker at a thrift shop called Nakano Thrift Shop. And Nakano Thrift Shop is owned by a middle-aged man called Mr. Nakano. And so basically Mr. Nakano is Hitomi's boss. And what we know at the beginning of this book is that Hitomi also has a co-worker named Takeo, and occasionally we would also see the appearance of Mr. Nakano's sister called Masayo, who is a bit of an artist herself. She creates dolls. She makes dolls. Also, as we are, you get ourselves acquainted with the characters, we know that Mr. Nakano is a bit of an eccentric guy, and at the same time, another of his defining, personality trait is that he is a big womanizer. He has mistresses. He sees women at the side, on top of having a wife. So basically that's kind of like the what we know about Mr. Nakano. And we follow Hitomi as she works in this thrift shop, which honestly is not exactly really busy. They don't get like a lot of customers all the time, so for the most part this book is quite slow in terms of its action. But another thing that we follows in this book is Hitomi's own sort of like romantic pursuit, and her and the person she's pursuing is her co-worker named Takeo. And throughout this book we see her development, or rather the development of her romantic relationship with Takeo, which personally I think, I'm not going to reveal much the nature of this relationship, but I feel that the relationship between these two individuals is something that I just can't feel, or rather I probably can acknowledge that there is a relationship over here, but I won't say that it's a particularly healthy relationship. It's a bit toxic, to be honest. So that's one thing that I was actually quite surprised about this book. And I actually thought that this book would be somewhat whimsical. And I think that's when I made my first mistake. I expected something out of a book from an author that I've not read before. So when I look at this title, the title of this book, it's called The Nakano Thrift Shop. I knew that it was going to be, it was going to involve a thrift shop, with, in which things are generally cheap and probably have some kind of, memories or stories associated with them. And I thought, maybe the novel is going to explore that side of, that side of such objects. And when I looked at the table of contents in this book, each of these title of chapters were actually names of random objects. And I sort of just assumed that, well, maybe these objects are kind of like, the things found in the Nakano Thrift Shop. And that sort of further reinforced my expectation that this book is going to be, at least in my head, this book is going to sort of explore how these items are going to relate in some ways to the main story of this book. The main story remains something that I still, I didn't assume the main story. So, that's a good thing. But then, I sort of assumed like a major part of this story. I sort of had this like preconceived notion that this book was going to take a particular form in my head. And when I read this story, I was surprised because the things that I imagined in my head about this book didn't exactly happen the way I thought it would be. And I was even more surprised when I learned that the main story of this book was actually about a relationship that sort of just feels toxic. And actually, I would say that many characters in this book feel kind of problematic as well. Especially like, people like Mr. Nakano, who is a major womanizer in this book. I would say perhaps Mr. Nakano's sister, Masayo, would probably be the most normal person in this book. Even the main character is someone who I think has major flaws. And we sort of just keep on seeing her flaws, like like her inability to communicate, her naivete in relationship as we follow her own, her romantic pursuit in this book. Another thing that I would sort of just want to comment about this character, this main character, Hitomi, is that she is really thirsty. And actually that is going to be like a little bit of a theme in this book. Sex is actually something that, surprisingly, for me at least, because I assumed a lot, sex apparently plays a lot of, a big part in this novel. Let me just adjust the lighting a little bit. It gets a little bit too glaring. Anyway, back to this book. Apparently, sex is featured a lot in this book, from the point of view of, the womanizer, Mr. Nakano, and also the main protagonist, Hitomi. She is just, I don't judge this character. I don't say that this character is awful because she thinks about sex all the time. I consider myself to be a fairly sex-positive person. But I do think that, the fact that this character is written in such a way is actually not something that I want to rant about. I don't think that the big weakness of this book is how it is actually about a toxic relationship, but how it actually explores this toxic relationship with respect to other things that are happening in this book. Because not only we get the main story of Hitomi and also a little bit of snippets of Mr. Nakano being a womanizer, but we also get scenes of customers coming to the shop, selling their stuff, customers buying some stuff, sort of stuff that happens in a shop, business transaction, and all those things. But it's just it feels to me like all of these elements, they don't really blend well together. Like they don't really connect well with each other. They sort of just feels like really loose elements that somehow is connected by a very, very fine, very sort of like very tiny strings that almost as if make them appear as if they are like discrete elements, somewhat detached from one another. All of these elements, they just don't really form like this really unified story that make this book feel more focused. That's what I want to say. Like this book just does not feel very focused on a particular thing. Even though it has the main story with Hitomi, even other things that are happening around Hitomi does not exactly exist in this book in order to serve the main story. They sort of just exist there and they're just vibing and then just like, they're there. But they're not there for each other. Different elements of this story, in this story, they don't work with each other to form one cohesive unit. And, that's my main complaint about this book. So when I was reading this book, sometimes it feels kind of frustrating because when you read about a particular scene, it's kind of difficult for you to think about how that scene, which may span for a few pages, how that scene is going to contribute to the main meat of this book. So that's sort of like why I find this book to be, a bit difficult to read for me. Language-wise is okay, but, enjoyability, maybe not so much. Now, let's get to a point, to the point where my saltiness is going to be negated. But it's, I promise it's not going to be really long because overall I didn't enjoy this book. So what I like about this book is not that, that big. But I do like the slowness in this book. I like the way that it portrays how things are just sort of slow and sometimes inconsequential, which is kind of strange because just now I was complaining about plot points that are inconsequential, but at the same time, there is also this vibe in which when I was reading this story, even though I was like a little bit frustrated about how things or nothing is happening, at the same time I also felt like I was able to live in the moment, in the moment in which things need not happen. Things did not necessarily happen. You don't have to have like big things happening in your real life all the time. Sometimes things can just go quiet and slow down, just like how it is with this book and how it is with the shop in this book. Slow days, and I don't know. It sort of made me appreciate that in a way. I would love to encounter a book that would be able to make me feel that way, but at the same time, it was also able to give me a good story. And I must say that this book was able to give me that vibe, but it didn't really give me a good story. So, yeah, rant over, I think. So, that's it for my thoughts on the Nakano Thrift Shop. And what do you think about this book if you have read it? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? What are the things that you like about it? That's what I'm very interested in hearing, if you like this book. And would you be interested in reading this book? You know, as usual. I mean, I'm not sure as usual is going to be something that I would keep on saying in the future if I were to have more ranty videos. But, you know, at least for this book, I would say if you are interested in reading it, do try it, and let's see how you would feel about this book, because apparently many people like this book as well. It's a famous book. I post about this book on Instagram, and a lot of people like that post. So that probably says something about this book. Anyway, yeah, I guess that's it for this rant video. In case you're wondering, I'm not really wearing a scarf. This is just a towel. But, you know, let me just fancy myself wearing a scarf. What do you think about it? Anyway, I'll see you again in a different video. So until then, take care. Thanks for watching. And bye.